All right, Larry Flaxman.
Thank you. I want to say, first of all, this is a huge honor for me to speak here. I mostly speak at large metaphysical and paranormal events, and the UFO phenomena is something that's always interested me. While I admit I don't have a whole lot of knowledge or background in the ufology field, my background is in hard science and theoretical physics. So what I bring to the table today is we're going to discuss something that may have applicability to what you guys are interested in. Extraterrestrials and UFOs. There is certainly the possibility that UFOs have the ability to time travel, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with it today. Unlike most scientists, I'm not very stuffy. I like to have a good time. So I'll be wandering around throughout the audience, probably calling people out on things, and we're going to have fun with this. So for the next hour and a half, we're going to try to take a very complex topic and make it as simple and as fun as we possibly can. The sound's not playing.
Back
but
on the big screen.
You
there we
built
go.
a time machine? What of a DeLorean? And fly. Hello.
Great Scott! Marty McFly and Doc Brown return
21 gigawatts!
for a whole new generation.
Anything you do could have serious repercussions on future events.
Isn't he a dreamboat?
You're my mom. Are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me?
In glorious cinematic digital quality for the first time ever.
My name is Darth Vader.
This is a big one, the one I've been waiting for all my life.
It's about time you saw
Back to the future.
Back to the Future in cinemas October 2010.
That was such a cool movie. Well, I'm an author, as you probably have all seen in your program. I've written a few books, quite a few. My first book, 1111, The Time Prompt Phenomena, went bestseller very quickly. That was a book that was very unique and interesting to me because I'd never heard of that phenomena. We actually originally, my writing partner and I, Marie Jones, had approached our publisher about writing a book about the psychology of the paranormal. And our publisher came back to us and said, hey, that's pretty cool, but why don't you write something about 1111? Well, neither one of us knew anything about 1111 or repetitive number sequences, so it turned into a very, very interesting book to research. And what we found out was that experience is very common. It's very universal. It crosses all religious and social boundaries. Probably, I would think, if I asked for a show of hands, probably someone in this room has had a repetitive number experience, whether it's 1111, 222, 333, 444, whatever. You've probably had that at some point in your life. And there is a scientific explanation for why that happens, and we discuss that in that book. Okay, I'm gonna be wandering around. All right. Probably can't. I'm not gonna stay. This is. All right. I'm here. Okay. So my second book was called The Resonance Key, and that's probably a little more applicable to what most of you in this room are interested in. In that book, we talk about resonance and sound specifically as being explanatory agents for a lot of things that we consider to be real, and maybe some things that we consider to be unreal as well. My third book was called The Deja Vu Enigma. As you might tell by the title, it's about deja vu, but it's also about other psychological mind experiences as well. If you've ever had an incident where you've lost time, where you've had accelerated time, we discuss that in that book as well. Believe it or not, there's a lot of scientific evidence and scientific research that's been done into the deja vu phenomena. My fourth book was called The Trinity Secret, and it was kind of our first foray into somewhat metaphysical, self-helpy kind of stuff. In that book, as you could probably divine from the name The Trinity Secret, we talk about the Trinity and the concept of the triune nature of reality and how everything revolves around the number 3. Every major religion has a concept of the Trinity. Myself, I'm Jewish, and I had no idea, but the Trinity actually exists in my own religion as well. Every major religion has a belief in the Trinity, or a concept of creation of threes. That was a very interesting book to write as well. I've contributed to a couple of other books, UFOs and Aliens, Lost Civilizations and Secrets of the Past, Ghosts, Spirits, and Hauntings. My latest book, which came out in July, and what we're going to talk about today, is called, it's kind of a cool title, This Book is from the Future. And it is a scientific explanation of time travel, both pro and con. And we're going to discuss that. We're going to talk about everything that's in that book. The Grid is a book that will be out at the end of this year. The Grid is basically an amalgamation of the last 7 years of our research. My writing partner and I have basically, we believe, have come up with a theory of everything. Now that's a pretty heady thing to say. There's a lot of authors that are out there that have come up with their potential TOEs or theory of everything, but we think we've actually nailed it this time with this book. We take the concepts of psychology, sociology, noetics, physics, every type of scientific endeavor that you can think of, and we find the cross-connective links. And there are very specific physiological connectors as well. Why a person has a, quote, paranormal experience, or an extraterrestrial experience, for that matter. And we talk about a lot of that in the Grid. My next book, which will also be out at the end of the year, is called Viral Mythology. And I'm really looking forward to this book. We haven't started it yet, but our publisher gave us the cover page already. It's going to be The Science of Story. That book will discuss the science behind fiction, legend, and lore. Really looking forward to that one. So that's going to be a really interesting one to write. As Michio Kaku says, once confined to fantasy and science fiction, time travel is now simply an engineering problem. We're going to talk about the engineering problem. We're going to talk about the physics problems. We're going to talk about a whole lot of things that have to do with time travel, things that are all very important for us to understand whether time travel is possible or not possible. Just by a show of hands, how many people in the room think that time travel is currently possible? That's quite a few. How many people think, no way, no how, it'll never happen? Okay. Toward the end of the presentation, we'll cover some interesting things about the potential conspiracies of time travel. But throughout this presentation, we have kind of a fixed index of what we want to cover today. We're going to talk about what time travel is. It's actually probably a little more than you realize is involved with it. We're going to talk about wormholes, black holes, and white holes. Some problems and paradoxes. Sounds great. I'd love to time travel. Well, there's probably some problems with that, and there is. There's some science problems, and we're going to talk about that. Some modern conspiracies. Boy, we all love conspiracies, don't we? Conspiracy theories are a lot of fun. I know my field, the paranormal, is certainly rife with them. I imagine the extraterrestrial field probably has quite a few as well. But we'll discuss some very modern conspiracies that are probably pretty interesting. Some that you may have heard of, some that you've likely not. We'll also talk about UFOs and how UFOs might be potential time travelers. As I said, I've had to somewhat tailor my presentation for this. I don't normally speak to the UFO angle, so it's kind of, this has been a learning process for me a little bit. So bear with me if any of the information in there just seems really obvious. To me, it wasn't very obvious. And then finally, we're going to talk about, are we already time traveling? Do we possess the ability to time travel today? Perhaps mentally, physically, is the United States government conducting experiments into time travel? We're going to talk about all of that stuff today. But most importantly, we're going to have a lot of fun with it. The science of time travel involves physics, obviously. When you say the word physics, the first thing that happens usually is most people's eyes start glazing over, and they start thinking that it's going to be incredibly complex and that I'm just going to blow you away with numbers and bore you to tears. I assure you that will not happen. I'm going to attempt to take very complex physics problems and equations and turn them into very easily digestible information. We're going to take hardcore physics, stuff that is really, really down and dirty, extremely difficult to understand stuff, and distill it down, kind of a physics 101 or time travel 101, if you will. I promise to make it as painless as possible, so just bear with me through this. If any of this does raise questions, I would be more than happy to answer if anyone has any questions about what we're going to talk about. So time travel. How many people in this room believe that they have time traveled at some point? Okay. By a show of hands, do you think you've traveled to the past? For those that have done it? What about the future? What about to different realities or different levels of the grid? We're going to talk about all that today. We're going to talk about the experiences maybe that you've had. Maybe some possible explanations for why you've had those experiences. Who hasn't seen the movie Back to the Future? I'm just curious. I'd be shocked if no one has. Well, time travel has become very much a cultural norm for us today. Time travel is a very ingrained part of science fiction. Science fiction books, movies, lots of plot lines involve the story of people that either travel backwards in time or forwards in time. It's interesting. I love time travel books, time travel movies, time travel stories. They're all fascinating. The concept of being able to travel in time is just awesome. Now, as my protege Sheldon and his crew with their time travel device, anyone recognize what that was? H.G. Wells' time machine, right? What about that one? Back to the Future. I'm not old enough to remember this one, but you remember? Okay. That was a good one. Jodie Foster. Yep. Nowadays, time travel is a very ingrained part of our culture. But with that being said, we certainly read about it, we watch it on TV, we hear about time travel. Do the laws of physics actually allow for the possibility of time travel? Does science back up the idea that we may be able to time travel at some point in the future? How many people think that it does? Everyone's hand in this room should go up. Because it absolutely is possible, according to traditional physics and science. Scientists today believe that probably within the next 150 years that we may have the possibility of being able to time travel. We're already doing it now, not at the macroscopic level where we're able to transport a human, but we're actually able to conduct, at the quantum level, we can time travel. And we're going to talk about that today. The thing that really leads into all of this, we need to talk about a genius, someone that you may have heard of, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein came up with a brilliant set of theories that he labeled the special relativity. And within special relativity, he theorized that time travel is absolutely possible. Much of what Einstein theorized back in the day is still absolute science fact for us today. But special relativity opens the door for us to be able to time travel. It allows us to have the ability to travel backwards or forwards in time. Now, according to special relativity, time will slow down if you go really, 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 really fast. In other words, if you can approach approximately 95% of the speed of light, time for you will begin to slow down. There's only one problem with that. The speed of light is incredibly fast, 186,282 miles per second. That's incredibly fast. To put that into perspective, a traveler that would be moving at the speed of light would be able to circumnavigate the equator exactly 7.5 times in 1 second. That's fast. Now, on a commercial jet, in comparison, in 4 hours, we'd only be able to cross the United States at 500 miles per hour. So certainly there are some engineering issues to being able to achieve FTL, or faster than light speed. We're going to talk about some ways that we possibly will be able to do that. More than likely, commercial jet technology will never achieve the ability to allow us to travel 186,282 miles per second. But there certainly are some other technological workarounds and possibilities that may one day very well allow us to travel back and forth in time. Now, the other problem is that once you speed up, once you get closer to the speed of light, what happens is mass starts increasing as well. So not only is it just extremely difficult to increase your speed to the speed that's necessary for time travel, but once you get up to speed, you get incredibly heavy as well. So Weight Watchers and all of your diets that you've been on won't help you for this at all. Exponentially heavy, in fact. That's a big issue. We may possess the technology one day to go super, super fast, but the mass increasing at a relativistic rate to that is also going to be a serious issue that we need to overcome as well. And that still doesn't get us back in time. even if we can somehow overcome our ability to travel 186,282 miles per second, we overcome the mass increase issue, we still have the problem with that doesn't actually get us back in time. So back to our friend Einstein for just a moment. Einstein and a gentleman by the name of Nathan Rosen came up with a brilliant idea back in 1933 that they called bridges. They believed that these bridges that were a part of general relativity would allow time travel. They believed that these bridges, which nowadays we call wormholes, originally they were called Einstein-Rosen bridges, but they believed that these wormholes would allow us to travel faster than light from one portion of the galaxy to another. Basically like dropping a BB down a straw. We would be able to travel just directly down and fast. So what's a wormhole? You've probably all seen the movie The Black Hole, incredibly unrealistic scientific endeavor. However, the actual definition of a wormhole is a geometry of four-dimensional space-time in which two regions of the universe are connected by a narrow throat. There are two different types of wormholes. There are black holes and there are white holes. Wormholes are basically the connectors between those things. According to what we think that we know in I just went blank. Astrophysics, that's it, sorry. The connector points are what we would need to utilize to allow us to time travel, those wormholes. There's only one problem with that. There's probably several problems. You'll hear me just throughout the presentation discuss problems. Unfortunately, there are some resolutions, but not resolutions for everything. At this point, as Michio Kaku said, it is an engineering problem. Once we figure out the engineering problem, we can probably do it. But as of now, it's still an insurmountable issue. One of the biggest issues in a black hole is that the gravitational field is tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. In fact, it's so great that even light can't escape the gravitational pull of a black hole. So what that means is anything that gets sucked into the black hole would get destroyed. If it's sucking light photons as well as some type of a craft, even if you were to design, well, we'll get to that in a few minutes, but even if a craft, anything that would go through the mouth of the wormhole would basically be destroyed by gravity. Now, white holes are basically the theoretical opposite of a black hole. How many people have heard of a white hole? It's a fairly rare thing, unless you're very familiar with space and you're really interested in it. A lot of people have never heard the term white hole, but it is the theoretical opposite of a black hole. And a white hole possesses kind of the opposite problem. Where the black hole has the gravitational issue, where everything is pulled into it and destroyed by the gravitational pull, a white hole has the issue with its kind of reverse gravity, where it's absolutely impossible to reach it in the first place. It's not impossible to escape it, unlike a black hole, but you can't get to it. Kind of sucks. The white hole repels everything, and I mean everything, including massive particles and even photons, like the black hole, and nothing can ever enter it. So you have that issue as well. If you can't create something that could somehow stabilize the mouth of the wormhole, hold it open, an exotic material perhaps, something that could hold it open to allow a ship to safely traverse it, you would be ejected out. But according to what we know now, within the physics realm, we believe that wormholes can provide a relatively easy means for us to travel. Not only to travel to distant regions of space, but also backwards or possibly forwards on our linear timeline. Now, I wrote a book about time. My 1111 book speaks very in-depth about this, as well as the time travel book. Time is not real. What we consider to be time, our linear time, is actually a man-made construct. In nature, time doesn't exist. So, to be able to travel backwards and forwards on our timeline basically is the equivalent of standing still, because the past, the present, and the future all converge at the exact same time. Now, it's very hard to kind of wrap your head around that, the idea that we're in the past and the future at the same time. Whole different presentation. If I had time, we could actually go into really in-depth things as far as the observer effect, Schrodinger's cat. There's a lot of things that really tie in with this concept as well, but not for this presentation. Back to special relativity for a minute. Special relativity then kicks in and predicts that traversable wormholes, if they exist, they would allow time travel. So Einstein basically said in not so many words that if we ever can figure out the way to traverse these wormholes, that we absolutely could time travel. We're still working on that now, but by traveling through the wormhole, you could not only travel between two different regions of space faster than time, faster than even a beam of light would be able to, but it would also allow us to travel back in time. That's called faster than light travel. Even approaching the speed of light is impossible today for us. So going beyond the speed of light is seemingly insurmountable with today's technology. But there are a few ideas how we could get around that. One idea is that time travel would be possible by somehow accelerating one end of a wormhole relative to the other. Basically, then we would bring that back. So what happens in that is that relativistic time dilation would occur. It would result in the acceleration of the wormhole mouth. And at the wormhole mouth, the aging would be less than the stationary one seen by an external observer. We'll get into what all that means in a minute. That probably went way over. But there's one more problem. I told you I was going to keep throwing problems out there. The other problem is, say we figure out the technological boundaries. We figure out a way to time travel. We figure out a way to somehow hold the mouth of the wormhole open using an exotic material, a mu metal or something. We design a craft that allows us to withstand the gravitational force. We have another problem, and this is a serious one, as if the other ones are not. The problem is that time connects differently through the wormhole. So, the time inside the wormhole is completely different than the time that would be outside of the wormhole. And we'll see a demonstration of what would happen further in the presentation. What basically is going on is that even if you have two clocks that would be synchronized at the beginning of the trip, one at the mouth and then one with the time traveler, what's going to happen is that the time that's within the wormhole is basically going to stay the same relative to those people. But the people that are outside observing the wormhole, time is going to pass by. We'll see an explanation of that better here in a minute. So anything that enters the accelerated wormhole mouth, then, according to the possibility of this, would exit at the stationary point prior to its own time of entry. Now think about that for a minute. It's kind of like if you think about a hoop, a little hoop that I've got a 6-year-old daughter and she loves her little hoop. Think about if you cut the hoop in half, you drop a BB down the hoop. Now say that BB was able to achieve faster than light speed. Couldn't, but just say it could. What would happen basically, according to this then, is that the BB would exit before it even entered the wormhole. You following me? Okay, because it gets deeper. So I promised that there would be a lot of problems that we would discuss. And true to my word, there's more. We're going to talk about some problems, some challenges to time travel, and also some implications for us as well. Even if we can time travel, what are some of the implications of doing it? In other words, even if we can do it, is it a good idea to do it? Well, maybe, maybe not. If you ask 5 different people for their reason for wanting to travel, I guarantee you'll get 5 different answers. When we were writing our book, we asked several people what their motivation would be for going back in time or forward in time. And we saw the whole gamut of things. We had some people say that they'd like to go back in time before they had a relative that had passed away to spend more time with them. We had several people that said that they'd like to go back in time to prevent themselves from making a stupid mistake. Don't we all? We had some people that said that they wanted to go to the future to see what would happen to our society 100, 150, 200 years from now. All over the board. It's a very interesting social experiment or social question. If you think about, every one of us probably has a favorite time in our lives. Whether it was me, my favorite time was probably the 80s growing up. I love the music, love the culture, love the 80s. But there's a lot of people that thought the 80s sucked. So there's probably, to you, what is your first place that you'd like to go back to probably be a lot different than your next door neighbor or me. But some challenges. Oops, I skipped one. Some of the challenges are, as we discussed earlier, there are some tremendous gravitational issues, but I also forgot to point out the fact not only are there gravitational issues, but there's also issues with the structure of the wormhole as well. Wormhole mouths, by their very nature, theoretically, are also not static structures. So what that means is that the wormhole mouth will have both instant expansion as well as contraction. Basically, instantaneously. That would crush you. That would crush me. We wouldn't be able to do it. If you had a wormhole mouth that collapsed in on itself, you'd be destroyed. That's a huge problem as well. Unless we can figure out a way somehow to develop an exotic material, as I alluded to before, perhaps a mu metal or some type of very high density homogulated, what's the word? Titanium. Right now, we don't have that technology. We don't have the ability to withstand that type of static pressure or force. So that's a huge problem. That's definitely one of the challenges. The other challenge, as I mentioned earlier, is that with the gravitational pull of the wormholes and the ability for those wormholes to suck everything in, including light can't even escape it in time. So we need to figure out a way to stabilize the wormhole. We need to figure out a way to stabilize the mouth as well as stabilize the throat of the wormhole as well. Now, is that an insurmountable challenge? With today's technology, yes. The future technology, who knows? How many people in this room would have thought 25 years ago that we'd be carrying around iPhones that have the power of computers that filled up rooms? How many people thought of that? So 150 years from now, absolutely the concept of time travel absolutely could make sense. Hell, I can remember back growing up in the 80s. You know, my first computer, I had a Radio Shack TRS-80 Model 3. Remember those? The cassette recorder and everything, and I thought that was awesome. It had a 4K of RAM. Who would ever use 4K of RAM, right? So, 100 years from now, our technology, how many people have heard of something called Moore's Law? Moore's Law of technology. That applies to science as well. What we know today, in 25, 50, 75, 100 years from now, will seem absolutely barbaric and primitive compared to what we know today. So certainly our ability to take on some of these challenges and provide resolution to them certainly could exist. We talked about how gravity would be the destroyer of you unless we could figure out a way to hold that wormhole mouth open. There's a lot of research that's being done now into very high-dense stabilizing materials that could be used for this. In fact, there's a lot of actual scientific research that's being done into time travel. There's a gentleman by the name of Ronald Mallett. He is a physics professor at the University of Connecticut, and Dr. Mallett has come up with an ingenious way that he believes will allow time travel by the use of, it's really complicated, but it's basically using a rotating laser array. And it's doing something with the beams, and it's really cool. And he's saying for about $250,000 that he could create a working time machine today. Now, this is coming from a tenured physics professor at University of Connecticut. You can Google him and read all about it. My thought is, well, hell, for $250,000, I can't imagine the government hasn't snapped this up yet. Or maybe they have, and we'll talk about that in some of our conspiracy theories. But there is a lot of research that is being done today on time travel. Think of all the possibilities of what could be done with it. From a military strategy perspective, what we could do with the ability to time travel. So a lot of the research now is focusing on, as Dr. Kaku said, overcoming those engineering hurdles, those tremendous problems that we have now with the engineering aspect of time travel are being looked at today. What we figured out, and we have yet to create this yet, but we've basically decided that if we could create some type of a negative energy material, some sort of a very exotic negative energy, that would be enough to hold the wormhole open and also stabilize the throat of the wormhole. Now, if any of us are as big as Star Trek fans as me, you probably remember the concept of the transporter and the dilithium crystals and everything that they used. Well, a central tenet of Star Trek technology was the use of negative energy. The transporter would use that as well as the propulsion mechanism of the Enterprise. Well, now, fast forward 40 years to today, we're now saying, yeah, negative energy. If we can figure out a way to harness that, certainly that could be used to hold the mouth of the wormhole open. So what about some paradoxes? I'd say this and probably the conspiracies are probably my two favorite parts of time travel. Just because you can do something, does that mean you always should? Probably not. Just because we have the ability to create atomic weapons and wipe countries off the face of the earth, does that mean that we should? Absolutely not. Same thing with time travel. I think there is certainly an ethical concern with time travel. Lots of ethical problems with the concept of time travel. Just a theoretical. Throw this out there, and we'll get to more examples in a minute. Say there's some anti-government faction that's out there, and say this faction figures out time travel. They go back in time, they could absolutely change our timeline and our face of history today. That'd be a really bad thing. Well, maybe not such a bad thing nowadays, but a lot of issues with that. I mean, that seriously could have very significant ramifications for each and every one of us in this room. If someone went back in time and changed something, we may all not be in this room right now. This conference may not be going on. We may not be existing in the same reality that we consider real today. So some of the paradoxes that we're going to talk about are some very unique ones. I think ones that are probably not insurmountable, but certainly ones that today offer some serious challenges to us as well. So I spoke before about some examples of what happens if we are able to time travel. Let's imagine one potential scenario. Imagine that we are able to design a time travel machine. We are able to figure out a way, perhaps it's the DeLorean, we hit 88 miles per hour, 1.21 gigawatts of power kicks in, and we travel back in time. Say we figured out the technology, we've overcome all the technological hurdles, we are able to time travel today. Well, let's imagine what happens if we can. Imagine one of those wormholes would be placed upstairs. It really wouldn't, but imagine it's placed upstairs in your house, and the other wormhole, the white hole, the black hole would be up in the second floor, white hole would be on the first floor. Second part of the wormhole mouth would be placed downstairs. Highly simplifying things here, but just bear with me on this. Well, the wormhole then forms a loop. That makes perfect sense. It would form a loop between the first and second floor of the house, right? You follow so far. Okay? Now, John and Jason are two intrepid time travelers, decide that they are going to go jump in their time machine, and they want to go back and visit the signing of the historic Gettysburg Address. So, they jump in their time machine at 5 p.m. today. They hit the button, approach 88 miles an hour. They approach nearly the speed of light, and what happens? They start to travel in time. Meanwhile, Mary decides that she wants to stay home. She's not as much of an adventurer. She just doesn't want to go out. She has no interest in seeing ancient history of Lincoln. She wants to stay home. So she stays home and waits for them to return. John and Jason are gone for 12 hours. They leave for 12 hours on their expedition. They see the signing of the Gettysburg Address. They see all of the cool things of that particular time period. And then they decide to come back. 12 hours isn't a lot of time, is it? Half a day. No big deal. They come back. Well, there's a serious problem. Mary has aged 10 years of her life. They were gone for a very short period of time, but yet because of relativistic time dilation, as we discussed before, she's aged. She's aged significantly. She's lost 10 years of her life waiting for those fools to come back. That is probably one of the biggest issues. Once we get beyond the technological hurdles of time travel, that is one that I don't think is insurmountable. Is insurmountable. That is not one that I think can be fixed. There is not certainly a Band-Aid that can fix that 10 years of life that Mary had lost. So, even if we figure out the ability to time travel, what happens to the people that don't time travel? All of your relatives and friends, all the people that you left behind when you went scurrying around the timeline. They age. You don't age. Your time remains the same, but they all age. That's a big problem. So now what about paradoxes? Again, say we don't care about the aging of our friends and family and relatives. We have figured out the method of holding the wormhole open safely. We've figured out time travel. We've mastered the art of walking the grid or the timeline. What are some paradoxes? What are some things that we think may actually prevent that time travel from happening in the first place? Some things that may be outside of our control. Natural laws, perhaps. Well, what is a paradox, first of all? By its very definition, a paradox is a statement that is seemingly contradictory or opposed to common sense and yet is perhaps true. Sometimes I wonder if our current political climate isn't a paradox. Lots of paradoxes exist. Within time travel, there are some as well. We believe that there certainly is the possibility that Mother Nature somehow kicks in, or some other force beyond our understanding, that would prevent us from time traveling in the first place. There's three basic paradoxes that we've decided are probably most applicable to the concept of time traveling. There is the matricide paradox, there's the Polchinski paradox, and there's the free lunch paradox. Now probably the first one, you probably can figure out what that's about. The second and third one, maybe not so much, but we're going to discuss it. It'll make more sense in just a minute. So in the matricide paradox, say that fast, we also have called that a number of other words as well. It's probably most famously known as the grandfather paradox. How many people have heard of the grandfather paradox? One or two, maybe three people. Well, the grandfather paradox is potentially a big problem as well. Within the grandfather paradox, it's probably best if we imagine a specific scenario. Let's imagine that our intrepid time traveler decides to go back in time to kill his grandfather for whatever reason. He jumps in his time travel device, goes back 50, 75 years, and he wants to kill his grandfather. Okay, what happens? Well, his success, if he's able to kill his grandfather, would mean that he would have never existed in the first place to have killed his grandfather. So that cyclical nature kind of kicks in, and you have some problems with that. The timeline changes. You kill your grandfather, well, you wouldn't be able to go back in time and kill him because you never would have been created in the first place. That's a pretty serious issue. One of the controls that we believe may play a part in time travel, and we'll talk about the rest of the paradoxes in a minute. I'll just throw this out. One of the controls that we believe may exist within natural science is that Mother Nature somehow can prevent us from altering the past. I know I'll date myself, certainly, but how many people remember floppy disks? The little 3.5 and 5 1/4 inch discs. Remember how it had a little write protect tab on the side that you could flip? One of the theories of time travel protection, or natural protection, I should say, is that Mother Nature has imposed some type of a write protection mechanism on the past. In other words, sure, we can travel back to the past, just like we can stick the floppy disk in the drive and we can read the contents of it, but we can't change the information that's on that. That's certainly one possibility. Now, the second concept of a paradox is what we call the Polchinski paradox. And in the Polchinski paradox, the more popular name is also it's called the billiard ball paradox. As an example of that, the Polchinski paradox basically utilizes time travel to prevent time travel from occurring in the first place. If you think about a pool table, you think about a ball that's launched from the right hole and then it exits the left before it enters the right hole in the first place. It collides or deflects with itself and then somehow misses each time. Think that's possible? Maybe. Certainly, there's nothing within traditional science and physics that say the Polchinski paradox cannot occur. It certainly is a possibility. Just like everything else we're discussing today, this is all theoretical. I can't stand up here and tell you that this is science fact because it's not. This is what we have theorized. But at the same time, our reality may not be exactly what we think that it is either. Our reality in many ways is shaped by our own perception and our observation of reality. So what we think to be hardcore black and white truths may not actually be such. But that's, again, a whole different presentation. So then we have the free lunch paradox. The free lunch paradox is another possibility where nature doesn't allow us to travel back in time and, again, manipulate or change anything. As an example of this, imagine that a young Leonardo da Vinci travels back in time. He's able to meet his younger self, and he gives him the portrait of the Mona Lisa. He thinks that that will elevate his career. That will speed up the process of becoming the famed artist that he was. He shaved off probably 50 plus years of Da Vinci's career. He's then made it so older Leonardo would become much more famous and acclaimed quicker than he did. Well, the problem with that, though, is young Leonardo then gets a free lunch without putting any effort into drawing the portrait in the first place. He gets something for nothing. And what we know about science and about energy, you can't get something for nothing. There's nothing. If anyone ever tells you something is 100% free, it's not. There's always there's something. Same thing with this. So we believe that nature might somehow conspire to prevent that free lunch from happening. That's pretty cool, if that's the case. Where would the origin of that portrait actually be? If young Leonardo, or if old Leonardo went back, gave it to young Leonardo, what was the origin of the portrait? Was it from Leonardo 1, Leonardo 2? What was the actual genesis of that? So we think that Mother Nature conspires to prevent us from changing the past, which is probably a really good thing. There's probably a lot of things that people could do in the past that would potentially absolutely muck up our reality and history today. So with all the problems I'm giving you, surely there's some sort of resolution to these. Surely there's some way that we can resolve these problems. And there is. There certainly is. One of the theories that we could use to resolve some of the paradoxes of time travel is the multiverse, which is probably my favorite one, or the parallel universe theory. How many people are familiar with the parallel universe theory, or the multiverse? Okay. The second idea to resolve some of these paradoxes would be what's called the chronology or time protection conjecture. That's another one of those words that if you say really fast that you'd win something for that. And then finally there is what we call the superposition theory. Now, the parallel universe is probably my favorite. I could talk for hours about parallel universes and the multiverse. I think, personally, off time travel for a second, but I think parallel universes and multiverse will actually explain nearly 100% of what we consider today to be paranormal. What we're considering ghosts, I use quotes around that, or spirits, or whatever you want to call it, I think can simply be explained by the multiverse. And if you want to know more, come see me in my booth after the presentation. The multiverse theory was created by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Hugh Everett III. And Dr. Everett believed that there's a lot of different ramifications of this multiverse. He also thought that wormholes, once we identify a wormhole, that it may not necessarily even connect to the white hole in our own universe. In other words, Professor Everett believed that once you entered the black hole in our universe, there was a very good possibility that you would exit the white hole, the end of the wormhole, in a completely different universe, not our own universe. The science behind that backs it up. The science says basically that the state of one system would then lead to unique specification of the state of the other subsystems. Basically, science backs up the idea of a parallel universe or a multiverse. In fact, M theory, currently now, you can read a variety of things. Some people will say that M theory can explain up to 11 different possible dimensions. I've actually read some offshoots of that where they're saying now that some of the work that's being done at the Large Hadron Collider might actually show that not only is there 11 possible universes or multiverses, but there may be up to about 30 different realities. Now, can you imagine 30 different multiple universes all existing alongside ours at the exact same time? Imagine 30 other conferences, UFO conferences, just like this occurring at the exact same time in all of the other universes. Probably with a lot better looking guys up here talking than me. Probably a lot funnier too. But it's certainly a possibility. How many people have ever heard of the idea of a doppelganger? The idea of a doppelganger, again, not time travel, but it's interesting, ties in very well with the idea of the multiverse. That what you are seeing is simply a reflection of yourself that is in a different reality or different a part of the multiverse, a different universe. A lot of science actually backs that up. And I think a big part of our grid theory relies on parallel universes or the multiverse, but I'd love to talk to anybody that's interested in that. In parallel universes, we believe that all outcomes exist simultaneously, but they don't interact with each other. All of these different realities seem to be happening at the exact same time, but they never touch. Or when they do touch, it's during very transient situations. How many people, again, we're going to go off topic for just a minute, but it's really relevant to this. How many people have ever had a paranormal experience? Not extraterrestrial, paranormal, because I think there's a lot of crossover there too. How many people are into recording EVP or electronic voice phenomena, using digital recorders, trying to capture the voices of the dead? Well, a lot of people, serious scientists in fact, believe that when you are going out and capturing EVPs, if you discount all of the possibilities of all of the different ideas of what you actually may be getting, spurious radio transmissions, etc., that you actually may be listening in a way to another universe. You may actually be picking up some other reality that exists alongside our own. Now, if you think about those folks that have had paranormal experiences, there seems to be a very specific set of circumstances that occur when you have an experience. You can't just snap your fingers and have something occur. I want you to appear right now. Bam. It doesn't happen like that. There's a specific set of environmental things that happen, physiological things that are going on within you. I talk about all that stuff in my book, The Grid. But my point is that all of those things existing in these other realities and multiverses are just as real as you and me. In other words, perhaps we're dead in a way, and that the other people or the other entities, whatever you want to call them, in the other multiverses are just as alive as us or more alive than us. Perhaps they're doing EVP recording sessions of us thinking that we're dead. Now, I know that's funny, but potentially think about the ramifications of that for a minute. Without getting into the hard physics behind the observer effect and things like that, our reality is basically fixed by observation. So something's probably observing us into reality. Well, just come see me. We'll talk about that later. I could totally do the whole presentation on the multiverse, but you're here for time travel, so let's finish time travel. But suffice it to say, parallel universes and the multiverse are a very significant part of our ability to possibly overcome some of the issues with time travel. We believe that each universe in the multiverse is mutually unobservable until there's some sort of a situation that allows us to interact. When you have that paranormal experience or when you record that electronic voice phenomena, there are certain things that happen that allow the thinning of the veil, if you will, to allow you to observe those other realities. But until that happens, each one of those universes is completely unobservable to us. But all are equally real worlds. All are just as real as our reality is to us right now. We just can't perceive them. So the next resolution was by a pretty famous guy you might have heard of, named Stephen Hawking, maybe a few. Stephen Hawking believes that the law of physics themselves conspire to prevent time travel. He believes that time travel is impossible for macroscopic objects. You and me are macroscopic objects. We're large. We share quantum, we're made of quantum stuff, but on the big scale, we're large. We're macroscopic. Dr. Hawking believes that large-scale objects cannot time travel. He believes that physics prevents that from happening, that simple science will never allow large objects. He believes that quantum time travel is certainly possible, and we've proven that with some of our experiments, but that we'll never have the ability to transport ourselves. According to Professor Hawking, the universe reacts in some sort of natural way to prevent the modification of that timeline as well. We believe that certainly is a definite possibility. Mother Nature doesn't want us changing anything around. They don't want us altering our fixed timeline. A good example of this that Professor Hawking has used is imagine that someone goes back in time to kill his grandfather, as we discussed before, but utilizing his theory or his idea of protection, he believes that what happens then is you go back in time, you find your grandfather, you aim dead center for his chest. Every time you try to shoot him, you miss him or you hit his leg. Something prevents you from actually killing him. You can wound him probably, but nature prevents somehow the permanent alteration of that timeline. I'm not so sure that I'm a very strong proponent of that. I've included it because it's certainly one theory that has been put out there, but it doesn't really make sense to me that how could you go back in time, have a perfect aim, but yet not? Some of it just doesn't make sense. Now, the superposition theory is another one. This is really interesting. And in the superposition theory, everything, including your grandfather, then is represented as basically a quantum state vector. And what happens utilizing superposition theory is that, say you go back and you travel in time, you go back to try to find and kill your grandfather. Well, the problem is every single person is indistinguishable from each other. You can't determine who your grandfather is, who your grandmother is, from anyone. Everyone looks basically the same. Again, that's a little far out there for me to kind of wrap my head around, but it's certainly one that is well posited in the scientific community as well. The laws of nature somehow prevent recognition of that individual. Whether it gives you terrible glaucoma or what has never been explained, but nature prevents you from going back in time and altering on a permanent basis. So now my favorite stuff. I love conspiracies. How many people like a good conspiracy theory? Every hand in this room probably should go up. We're at a UFO conference. Conspiracies are awesome. Some of them, unless you're involved in one. Actually, true story, I had someone come up to me downstairs yesterday, and if the person's in here, I apologize for using it as an example. But someone came up to me yesterday and asked me if I was part of the government conspiracy. Really? And I'm looking around and I'm like, what conspiracy? But yes, we all love conspiracies. So what are some modern time travel conspiracies? You don't hear about these all the time, but they're certainly there. Time travel conspiracies are just as prevalent as probably any other conspiracy that there is. Now, one of my favorite ones was one that came out back in 2010. This Irish filmmaker by the name of George Clark. He was an avid film buff, and one of his favorite shows, he loved Charlie Chaplin flicks. Loved Charlie Chaplin. Well, Mr. Clark was watching some of the outtakes from the 1928 film The Circus. How many people are familiar with this? Probably a few, probably not everyone. Well, what he found was what he believes purports to show an individual, a woman, but we're going to watch the video in a minute. To me, it looks more like a man, but a woman that is using a cell phone type device. Back in 1928. Now, we all know, hell, I can't even get AT&T service up here. We all know back in 1928 that the cell phone infrastructure was wholly missing. So, a lot of people really have issues with that. But the video quickly went viral, very, very quickly. In about a week, they had a little over 4 million hits on this video. Now, it's very interesting. There are several people, probably like in anything else, that think that they can debunk it, just like there are probably much more people that can't debunk it. I'm going to leave it up to you. We're going to watch the video, and I want you to make up your own mind what you think is happening. And I'll give you a little background first before we watch the video. In this video, you're going to see what appears to be a lady. And again, I think it's a man dressed as a lady. It looks, just by the gait, and I'm not to be funny, but just by the physical gait of this person, their stature, the way they walk, and if you notice pay attention to the Adam's apple and the jawbone. This particular individual is walking down the street in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1928 during outshots from the movie The Circus. And she's talking into something. She's holding something up to the ear, and you can very clearly see her mouth moving as she's walking. She's just going along, talking to something. What is it? Let's watch the video and see. I'll get out of the way. There's no sound, so we can discuss. I've taken the video and slowed it down as well, so we're going to see it here in a minute. There she is, or he is. As you can see, stops, turns, but she's talking. we'll watch a couple of different slowed down versions of this as well. 1928. Even the legs look like a guy. Very clearly she turns. She's talking into something, right? That's certainly what it looks like. She's holding something up to her ear, and she's talking in it, very much like we would talk into a cell phone today. This is not Photoshop. This is real. I didn't make this up. You can Google it. Super slow motion. You can even see the grip. She's holding something. Now, a lot of people think that what she was holding was something called, again, I'm blanking. It was called an ear trumpet. Now, an ear trumpet, I'll show you a picture of one because I went to the Pink Palace Museum in Memphis a couple of weeks after I learned about this. An ear trumpet doesn't look anything like what this lady is holding. This is what an ear trumpet looks like. Whoops. Hello. What happened? The projector die? Oh, the projector's still going. Okay, there we go. So there's an ear trumpet. I took this picture at the Pink Palace Museum in Memphis, and that is an ear trumpet. An ear trumpet was basically in use from about 1907 to about 1940-ish. The advent, a lot of people think, the conspiracy theorists believe that she's doing nothing more than talking into, she's got a hearing aid, that is some type of a hearing device that she's got. Now, my problem with that is twofold. One, the hearing aid technology of that time it wasn't like a cell phone like it is today. There was nothing of that era that appeared to be a cell phone. And the other problem that I have with that is that she was talking to someone, very obviously talking to someone. Now, if you had a hearing aid in, wouldn't there be someone around you that you would want to be hearing? I would think so. But the ear trumpet is one of the most popular theories as far as explaining what that lady was doing. That she was, as she was walking down the street, seemingly talking into something, a lot of people believe that it is a time traveler and that she was somehow utilizing a communication device. Well, then you've got folks that say, well, obviously cell phone technology and infrastructure didn't occur back in 1928, but I mean, if you can figure out time travel, wouldn't you think you'd have communication linked as well? So, it's out there. It's certainly a conspiracy. It's a possibility. I'm not going to say one way or the other what I think that it is, but it certainly is an interesting one. Now, and there's just an example of the ear trumpet compared with what she's holding up, and the two things it doesn't look the same. Just the grip on the device. Yeah. Yeah, especially where I live in Little Rock. That happens all the time. So another time travel tale. How many people have heard of Project Rainbow? Project Rainbow is probably one of my favorite ones. Project Rainbow, also known as the Philadelphia Experiment, involved the alleged disappearance of the USS Eldridge on October 28, 1943, and it's at the root of probably the most famous time travel conspiracy of all. A lot of folks that were reportedly had witnessed this event believe that the ship teleported from one location to another. It somehow transported itself in time as well. The Philadelphia Experiment, it's been the subject of books, movies, all kinds of different things about it. It's never been proven. There's no scientific evidence to prove one way or the other. However, I can tell you that every year there are still several surviving members of the USS Eldridge. And every year they meet to discuss war stories and the things that are going on in their lives. And when interviewed, none of those folks that actually served aboard the ship seem to have any recollection of any kind of government project like that. Now, I think certainly, usually when there's smoke, there's fire. There's usually something behind the legend and lore. So it's certainly a possibility that there was a government project that was aboard the ship. More than likely, it was something for radar invisibility, something that would allow them to navigate the waters without tripping any of the mines of the time. But as far as time travelers, you might have a different opinion. Now, another one, and this gentleman is a friend of mine on Facebook. Since 2004, a gentleman by the name of Andrew Basiago. How many people have heard of Mr. Basiago? Mr. Basiago is an attorney in Seattle, and according to him, he believes that from the time he was 7 until the time that he was about 12 or 13, that he was a part of what he called Project Pegasus. Project Pegasus, according to him, was a secret United States government time travel project. It involved teleportation and time travel. And it was a part of that. You probably, anytime you hear of a government conspiracy, you always hear the word DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects. You always hear DARPA involved with everything. But according to Basiago, he was a part of this project, and he actually time traveled on the U.S. government's dime. According to Basiago, he can be actually seen in a photograph that was taken at the Gettysburg Address by a lady by the name of Josephine Cogg. He said that back in 1972, he time traveled, visited that location via what he called a plasma confinement chamber that was located in East Hanover, New Jersey. Does anyone else know what East Hanover, New Jersey is famous for? Keebler cookies. So, I'm going to let you look at Basiago's photo that he claims was taken by Josephine Cogg of him on the days of the Lincoln address at Gettysburg. According to Basiago, we'll see a bigger picture in a minute. According to Basiago, I had been dressed in period clothing as a Union bugle boy. I attracted so much attention at the Lincoln speech at Gettysburg wearing my oversized men's street shoes that I left the area around the days and walked about 100 paces over to where I was photographed in the Josephine Cogg image of Lincoln at Gettysburg. So he has put this out there, public about it. He's absolutely saying he is a respected attorney in Seattle. So what about the future? Well, there's a lot of different things to look at, a lot of possibilities. Can we go to the past? Are we strictly limited to time travel to the future? Well, astrophysicist Stephen King believes that, yeah, we are capable of time travel, but that aliens may also be able to as well. Now, he didn't think that at the macroscopic level with today's technology that we were able to do it, but he thinks that aliens certainly could do it. Michio Kaku said that aliens may be time travelers from the future who possess advanced technologies that we may one day possess ourselves. Who are we to argue with the two of them, right? How many people are familiar, I would think probably everyone, with the Bentwaters incident, the UFO incident? For those that are not familiar, it's probably Britain's most famous UFO case. It was the Rendlesham Forest. It was back in December of 1980, and it occurred over the course of 2 nights. Now, there's a lot of controversy as far as what actually happened over the course of those events, but there are witnesses to it, and some very credible witnesses at that. There are witnesses that were U.S. Air Force personnel that experienced this. They were based at RAF Brentwater and RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk, and they believed that they saw an extraterrestrial object. Now, this gentleman, security police officer Jim Peniston, was on scene when the Bentwaters incident occurred, and he was actually close enough to touch the side of the thing. He described it as a very small, triangular, metallic-shaped object. According to Peniston, that's just to show you the size of it. According to Peniston, he saw what looked to him to be Egyptian hieroglyphics on the side of the object. Now, how could you have something that looked very similar to Egyptian hieroglyphics? Well, obviously there's the theory it's extraterrestrial writing, handwriting of some sort. But what if it really was? There's a lot of people that believe that our ancient brethren in Egypt possessed extraterrestrial technology. Absolutely. I mean, still to this day we can't explain how the pyramids were built in the manner that they were. Been a lot of theories as far as how they have. They found hieroglyphics that have depicted flying machines all throughout history. So what if the Egyptian hieroglyphics that he saw absolutely were? They were from us. Maybe they were us from the future. Bentwaters was very unique also in that in 1994, he went under hypnosis and he claimed that while he was witnessing this object, that he also had some type of a telepathic communication with the occupants of the craft. And Penniston believes that the occupants of the craft somehow intuited to him that they were from the Earth's future, that they weren't alien as much as that they actually were time travelers. They were us from the future. 9/11. How many people have ever heard of any conspiracy theories regarding 9/11? Probably a few. How many people have heard of a UFO conspiracy theory involving 9/11? That's a new one to me, but it exists. There is a conspiracy theory that basically says that on 9/11 that there was some type of a UFO that had actually inflicted the damage to the towers. In fact, there are folks that believe that the United States government has been conducting experiments into this for a long time, and that we actually possess technology, extraterrestrial technology, that have allowed us to build these remote-controlled drone-type things too. Again, that famous word, DARPA, conspiracy theories say that DARPA has been operating secret anti-gravity craft program with stealth camouflage for well over 40 years. And that may actually help to explain some of the stealth technology that we possess today. Some of the ability that we have nowadays may actually have come from our extraterrestrial brethren. But 9/11 certainly was not left out of the conspiracy theory as far as UFOs. UFOs with time travel capability may actually be manipulating gravity waves. That may be their method of propulsion. They may have figured out a way to not only manipulate gravity, but achieve those faster than light speeds that are necessary, that allow them to travel not only around the galaxy and the universe, but also back and forth in time. Anti-gravity propulsion is probably one of the most popular theorized methods of how a UFO might get from there to here, or even might get from time to time. Lots of theories as far as fuel sources. Probably one of the most popular would be that the zero-point field or the zero-point grid provides some sort of energy or some ability for these crafts to traverse the timeline. MIBs. I kind of got accused of being one yesterday, but they've been reported for decades. There's nothing new about the MIB reports. Most reported MIB encounters involve reports of strange men. I'm not telling you anything you probably don't already know. Usually in pairs, they're dressed in black. They sometimes have a vintage look to them. But what if some of those MIBs are also time travelers? What if they're not just U.S. government intelligence agents or whatever, but what if they're actually people from our past or our future that are here to somehow monitor activity on Earth, including any type of alien visitation that we have? Kind of like the movie Men in Black. Are the MIBs themselves alien time travelers? Have they come from some point in the future back to visit with us? Just curious, how many people have had an MIB encounter? A few. Okay. So are we already time travelers? In a way, we probably are. We experience dreams, deja vu, altered states of consciousness, precognition, remote viewing, missing time slips, time shifts. All of these are actual different manners of time travel. Maybe not physical time travel from the perspective of jumping in that DeLorean, hitting 88 miles per hour and traveling back in time, but certainly they do allow us to travel back in time. How many times have you heard a song on the radio, or you've smelled something, or you felt something that, bam, it just threw you back in time? You were right back at the exact time that you heard that song, or you smelled that fresh baking bread. How many times has that experience happened? It happens to me all the time. That's a form of mental time travel. Absolutely it is. So you are traveling in time. Jeremy Irons, we all have our time machines. Some take us back. They're called memories. Some take us forward. They're called dreams. Where would you go? If you could time travel, where would you go? Would you go to the past, to the future? Well, if you're like this gentleman, recruiting for someone to travel with him. Wanted someone to go back in time with me. This is not a joke. P.O. Box from Prince George. You will get paid after we get back. Must bring your own weapons. I like that one. Safety not guaranteed. And I've only done this once before. Nowadays, that would be on Craigslist. So thank you very much. I will be downstairs. Thank you. I'll be downstairs. I'll have a few copies of This Book Is From the Future left if you're interested. And if anyone wants to visit anything paranormal, extraterrestrial, I'd love to visit with you. Thank you again.